Everybody, I'm Mike from Electric City Sentai Denzicaster, and welcome to the Denzicaster Roll Call. We're taking a little break from our regular episodes of Denzicaster, basically so we can play some catch-up and get some editing done, get some more recording done, and these are fairly easy because these are just top 10 lists, or 5 or 3, or ever how many we decide to do. YouTube is great for lists, so every once in a blue moon we'll break some out ourselves, and today we are doing just that. This is part 1 of a two-parter, my top 10 all-time favorite Kamen Rider designs. Now, we're going to set some ground rules here, okay? Number 1, this is my opinion of the suit itself, not necessarily the show the suit originated in, because my opinions are close in some cases. My love of the costume and the suit comes from my love of the show. In other cases, it's just my appreciation of the costume. Also, we are looking only, because there are so many different rider costumes out there, we are looking only at the primary riders from each series, meaning they have to be considered one of the main riders over time. And we are only looking at their base form, so we're not looking at any of the wild super upgrade forms or anything like that that have come along in Kamen Rider history. So, with that said, here's my top 10 all-time favorite Kamen Riders this week, going from number 10 to number 6. Alright, so my number 10 is the third all-time Kamen Rider from the second of the Showa-era Kamen Rider television series, and that is V3. To be honest, it's one of the more garish-looking of the old Showa-era costumes. The Showa costumes lacked a lot of the flair that we would expect from all of the newer outfits. You think now complex vacuum-formed armors and plastic and these metallic or pearlescent materials that they use for the finishes, super sophisticated and sleek looking, and that was not the rule of the day back in the 70s and early to mid 80s. No, instead, back then, it was primarily just a jumpsuit, a jacket and some pants, some boots that were probably spray painted, and in this case, some foam accoutrement attached to it to give it the look of armor. And a lot of times the helmets themselves were scratch made. In fact, it always looked to me like elements of the original Kamen Rider helmets were probably paper mache or something close to it, not knowing the specifics as far as how each of the costumes was manufactured and created. But V3's look was always pretty interesting to me. The bright green with the red and the silver and the white, a lot of colors, but nothing that really clashed, unless you consider red and green to be a color clash. Some people do. I consider it just Christmassy looking. But V3 is definitely one of those costumes where my love of the show helped spawn my love of the costume and my love of the actor. Hiroshi Miyauchi, who played V3, Shiro Kazami, was tremendous in the role, and I loved it so very much when I got to see the entire run of V3. Definitely one of the most captivating characters and most dynamic action sequences I had seen out of the Showa era, pretty much period. So I always really dug Kamen Rider V3, from the red helmet to the green eyes, which was very unusual for the Showa era, and the signature V3 pose, which always seemed to change, and no one could quite figure out exactly what it should be. Sometimes it was like this, and sometimes it was like this, and my personal favorite was this, so that was V3, but I digress. Kamen Rider V3, my number 10. My number 9 comes from the Heisei era. In fact, he is the first official Heisei era Kamen Rider, and that is Kamen Rider Kuuga. Now, Kuuga was one of the first riders to have multiple forms repeatedly throughout his series. Certainly not the first. That distinction would belong to Kamen Rider Stronger in 1975, and then later Kamen Rider Black RX would have 3 forms in his show. But Kuuga would have several different variations, from his Mighty form to Titan form, which was a purple and silverish scheme, Pegasus form, I believe was green. Dragon form was green. Pegasus form was blue. Several different variations of the costume with slight tweaks to different elements, the eyes, the helmet, like the horns and such. The design is very reminiscent of the Showa era designs, which in part would probably be because this is the first of the Heisei era designs. It is the only one that Shotaro Ishinomori had some input on. He was actually working on Kuuga before he passed away, the initial concepts of the series anyway. If you look at the belt, it's very much like an old school rider belt with the red jewel in the middle, not unlike the red Cyclone fan from Kamen Riders 1 and 2, Ichigo and Nigo. It's the solid suit, although you see accoutrements that give you the look of other elements, such as the cuffs here that give the illusion of the separate boots, and so on. And the molded musculature into the plastic chest plate gives you that look very similar to the old school original riders. So I always really liked Kuuga. It's probably one of the most simplistic of the Heisei era designs. Makes sense since it was the first one, but it is still one of my favorites. And the black and red color scheme with the gold trim, very nice. Kamen Rider Kuuga, my number 9. My number 8, and it's kind of hard to do one of these lists without the original. In this case, Kamen Rider Ichi-go, Kamen Rider number 1. Now talk about a costume that actually went through some changes. This is the original Kamen Rider, and the original costume actually went through a great many changes, even though the character himself, as far as forms and such, really didn't have any. There was a point where they said he had powered up, and perhaps they used that to explain off a costume change, but he never had different forms, so to speak. The SH Figuarts line has several variations of the Rider costume for Rider 1. They're usually broken down into 3 distinct parts. The one that's pictured here on the screen behind me is probably the most well-known version of Rider 1. That would be New Rider 1 or Shin Ichi-go. He had the lighter colored helmet with the red eyes. There's a silver stripe, though kind of hard to see in the picture behind me, that goes straight down the center of the helmet from the mouth plate back. And then, of course, he has the green armored padding and the 2 silver stripes down each side, the silver gloves and boots, and the red belt. Now, the original costume is actually my favorite one. There were some slight differences. The original costume, all of the green padding you see, and even the green helmet, were more of a turquoise color, like a very dark turquoise. There were no stripes running down the sides of the costume. The gloves and boots were both green instead of silver, and the belt itself was white. On top of all of that, the compound eyes were actually pink on the original costume. A variation of that costume was later used when they brought back Rider 1 after his departure from the original series, when the actor Hiroshi Fujioka got injured. When he returned, the version of the costume that he wore became known as the Sakurajima costume, named for the place where the episode was shot, which featured Rider 1 with a black helmet. Pretty much the only time it ever happened. There was an accident on the set that damaged the helmet, and they had to repaint it, and the only color spray paint they had on hand was black. So he winds up with a black helmet. There have been 2 other versions of Ichi-go over the years. One is a heavily armored version of Ichi-go. That's the newest one that comes from the movie Kamen Rider Ichi-go, where Hiroshi Fujioka made his return to the role in what probably is his final Kamen Rider story. It certainly serves as a send-off for the character. And then there is the version from Kamen Rider the First and the Next, which is a riff off of the original costume from his debut in the series, with the turquoise and the darker helmet and the pink eyes. So, even in an updated form, this costume looks really, really cool. When you see him alongside his rider brethren, his progeny, so to speak, it looks classic, and it looks like the grandfather of them all. Makes sense that it does, because he is the original. Now, you can also give honorable mention to Kamen Rider Nigo, Rider 2, alongside him if you like on the list. It just happens that I like his Rider 1's original costume the most, and I never really cared much for the red boots and gloves that Rider 2 wore, so personal choice there. Anyway, Rider 1 is my number 8. Well, lucky number 7 goes to Kamen Rider Wizard, and what, in my opinion, was the only good-looking costume on the entire show, at least for Wizard. Now, I remember I told you when we first started that this isn't necessarily my opinions of the shows, but rather the costumes. Case in point, Kamen Rider Wizard as a show isn't terrible. It's not good either. It falls firmly in the middle. It had the supreme misfortune of being the show that followed Kamen Rider IV, which was a tremendous series, and was the last of sort of a trilogy of shows that were really one after another for Kamen Rider quite good, going from double to O's to IV. Wizard, though, follows an old adage that we have around these parts when it comes to Kamen Rider, and that is, the cooler the costume, the worse the show. That costume is freaking awesome. Now you know about all you need to know about the show. The costume, though, is really, really cool and has lots of departures from the basic Kamen Rider aesthetic while still being, obviously, a Kamen Rider. Gone are the compound eyes, replaced by a fully jeweled face mask, but you can see there's silver accoutrements that give the look of the eyes on the helmet. The helmet itself, which is a giant ring shape, if you follow the silver banding all the way around, much like the ring motif he uses in the show. He's the first Kamen Rider with a trench coat, which he uses with a great deal of flourish. The red as the secondary color with the red lining on the coat, the red stripe down the center, the red jeweled armor on the centerpiece of the costume. Very, very cool looking. The jewel motif comes across without being overdone, and it could really have been overdone. But you can see where it really plays in with the varying elements of the costume, from the cuffs to the helmet to the middle armor there. The rider belt does nothing for me whatsoever. The hand on the belt, I never did like that, and I can't stand Shabadubi Touch to Henshin. I never liked that either. The singing belt just annoyed the crap out of me. But from the style to the way he moves to really Seiji Takaiwa, the suit actor for pretty much every modern Kamen Rider, with only one or two exceptions, really got the most out of the costume. And it does pay some homage and have some things in common with my personal number 10, one of my personal all-time favorites, V3. With the center band going down the center piece here of the armor, you can see that center color flanked by the armor plating, very reminiscent. If I actually kick back here, because I have all these guys here on a slideshow, if I kick back to V3, you can see there's the center band of color down the center, and you have the armored plating on either side. Well, back to Wizard, it's the same sort of motif. So a little bit there too, something that helps him stand out a little different, but still paying homage to the classics, and that's something I think is pretty dang cool. So, while not one of my favorite Rider shows, without a doubt one of my favorite costumes, Wizard is my number 7. And last for this part of this two-parter roll call, we're going to be doing my number 6, the sincere Shaolin Fist of Kamen Rider. Hashtag that too. Hashtag sincere Shaolin Fist. Kazuya Oki, or Oki Kazuya, whichever way you want to say it, Super 1. Kamen Rider Super 1 was the 1980 installment into the Kamen Rider franchise. It was the 7th of the Showa-era television series. It followed New Kamen Rider, or Sky Rider, whichever way you want to say it. But initially, this was to follow the reboot of Kamen Rider that was never actually a reboot. Maybe we'll talk about that one day. But the bottom line is, up to this point, all of the old school Kamen Riders had a very 70s look to them. They were all products of the 70s, so that's not necessarily a bad thing, nor is it to be unexpected. However, this has a great many differences that you miss at first glance from all of the old school riders. For one, by all appearances, it's a single bodysuit costume. Up to this point, pretty much all of the riders, with an exception being maybe Amazon, had a separate jacket and pants. Here, it really does look like it's one suit. Now, like his predecessors, you do see the silver stripe down the leg and arms. You see the silver colored boots, silver being a predominant color, and the silver chest plate here. All of those pieces that I really, really like, and it all pays homage to the double riders. He was basically patterned in many ways after Ichigo, Rider 1. You have the helmet. I love the antenna on the helmet. It's very different, very angular, so pretty cool for the different Kamen Riders. The tassels are a little strange. Can't really ever say that the tassels did anything for me, but you know what? They kind of work for him, and the gloves change a lot over time. It's one of the gimmicks in the show. And there's his version of the Kamen Rider compound eyes. Different shape from most of them, and they're really integrated into the helmet. The old school Showa era riders had a tendency for the eyes to be elevated on the helmet. It was so that the actor inside could actually see. They had sort of sunglass visor material underneath where the actor's eyes actually were. Here, there's actually small holes drilled into the compound eyes to allow people to see out of them. Probably not as good vision, but it certainly does help the illusion. So, the master of the sincere Shaolin Fist, Kamen Rider Super 1, definitely one of my all-time favorite designs, and somebody we might be seeing more of here on the ECS network real soon on Denzicaster. So, that's numbers 10 through 6. Next time, I'll have numbers 5 through 1 of my top 10 all-time favorite Kamen Rider costumes. Now, of course, that's as of when this goes up. So, if you see it way down the road, maybe one day we'll revisit it, and maybe there'll be some really cool costumes that come out after that. Who knows? Folks, please check out all the other great shows here on the ECS network, and if you get a chance, jump over to our Cafe Press store, cafepress.com/ECS network. You can grab cool shirts, cool hats, and lots of other great merchandise that helps us out right here on the network with new equipment and what have you that we need to help keep everything running and improving. None of that money lines anybody's pockets. And check us all out on social media. We're all over the place. We're on Periscope, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we're all over Facebook. You'll see the social media stuff right after I get done talking. So, until next time, folks, when we will have a little more of my top 10 all-time Kamen Rider suits, I'm Mike. We'll see you next time on Denzicaster.